Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, net slaves, serfs, peasants, vassals, meat sacks. I'm a useful idiot. Welcome. And today I want to talk about Syria. And as my regulars know, a lot of times I like to take specific topics, a little more precision in the topics, and discuss them. But because I'm doing a lot of catch up, I'm actually combining all kinds of stories that I might normally talk about just on their own. So this Syria video will kind of be spread out all over the place, covering things that have happened over the last 8 months. And to call it a clusterfuck is certainly an understatement. And contrary to the title of the video, I am not going to provide a list of everybody that is not in Syria, but the list of everybody who has been in Syria or is in Syria right now continues to grow. And so the background being, of course, that the United States policy has been confused, to say the least, at least on the surface, over these last 8 months and certainly these last couple of years. And one of the more amusing anecdotes of this last news cycle was the fact that the United States finally gave up on its training so-called Syrian moderate, of course, which there aren't any really, and the last five. The United States government actually had an official who admitted that there was only five left, and even they gave up, and all those weapons ended up in the hands of ISIS. But anyway, so now we have this war continuing in Syria, even though there's peace talks going on right now. So that's another interesting thing. Just like Yemen and Libya, these peace talks, at least for right now, will mean very little because, for one thing, they're not even going to include any Syrian components. Once again, the major powers and the people fighting these proxy wars are going to decide who's going to go in there. And of course, the bottom line for the United States is finding a way to set up a puppet government in Syria. That will be the bottom line for the United States and the so-called coalition. So we have the Syrian regime has planes in the air. The United States has planes in the air. And in fact, Obama last August finally authorized direct U.S. airstrikes in Syria, changing tactics there. And of course, Obama also said 16 some odd times, I believe, that there would be no boots on the ground, and yet we have an announcement that U.S. will deploy more special forces just this month, more special forces in Syria and Iraq. Of course, we've already had special forces in Syria. That's been no secret to anybody that's been paying attention. So to act like there hasn't been any boots on the ground is pretty ridiculous. And in fact, it's amusing also that we have UK special forces operating in Syria dressed as ISIS. And so we have all kinds of special forces in there aside from these air raids. So we have the Syrian planes in the air, we have U.S. planes in the air, we have Turkish planes in the air, we have Saudi Arabian planes in the air, we have planes in the air from Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Bahrain. In last April, Canada started flying their first missions in Syria. In September, last September, France started flying their missions in Syria. In September, also Australia had their first airstrikes in Syria. And now this December, we also have UK airstrikes in Syria. So 2,500 plus coalition airstrikes so far, 95% by the U.S. And then, of course, we have Russia in there. And I almost jumped back in and started doing more useful idiot videos when Russia joined in Syria, because that's certainly a dramatic event. And I'll talk about that more in other videos. And of course, the other big event, Turkey shooting down a Russian fighter. And I'll also be covering that in a separate video because those are both very dramatic events. And then in last September, we also had reports of Russian troops and an increase in the Iranian troops. And certainly there's probably been an increase in Iranian troops, but these reports about Russian troops are a little premature, other than the fact that there are Russian troops there, special forces, and there are Russian troops helping use these military systems that Russia is giving to Syria now. So anyway, yeah, what a huge clusterfuck. What is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 countries with airplanes in the air over Syria. And of course, most of the media outlets don't want to talk about the fact that in addition to all those fighters in the air over Syria, we also have Israeli jets in the air over Syria. And during this entire Syrian conflict, of course, the Israelis have been acting with impunity and taking advantage of the chaos to further their own agenda. And in fact, we just had Israeli jets strike outside of Damascus again recently. In last November, Israeli planes also struck outside of Damascus. And we've even had incidents of Israeli planes being shot down, and they're keeping this story quiet enough that even Israeli jets getting shot down are only getting modest legs in certainly Western media. Last August, Syria shot down an Israeli jet, and 2 Israeli helicopters were shot down as well. So, and so this Israeli presence needs to be acknowledged as well, because it makes it all the more confusing who's up in the air. But as I brought up in a previous video, Israel now has a new friend in Russia, and they've coordinated their military efforts in Syria, and no surprise that that would happen. And so Russia is fully aware that there will be airstrikes by Israel in Syria, so they have an understanding there. And just in case things aren't weird enough, we also have Germany, Germany of all people, sending 1,200 troops to the Middle East, mostly to operate ships and aircraft. They have 3,000 total, or actually 4,200 troops overseas now. So Germany is becoming a more active participant in the empire. And like Japan, probably as the years go on, we'll see Germany push more and more to participate more actively in the empire. But they have 650 troops in Mali assisting the French in anti-terrorist operations down there as well. And Germany's also been involved because they're helping to arm the Iraqi Kurds. So anyway, we have a German presence there now on top of everyone else. And then to put icing on the cake, we have reports also of Cuban troops. Last October, theoretically, Cuban troops are fighting in Syria along with the Syrian regime and possibly Russian elements. But Cuban troops had worked with Syria before in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, and worked in various Soviet operations in Africa as well through the 70s, as I recall. But so now we have Cuban troops in Syria. So that's kind of interesting in light of the fact that we now have somewhat normal relations with Cuba. Now we have Cuban troops in Syria. We have Latin American mercenaries down in Yemen hired by the UAE and the United States. So anyway, there's your big clusterfuck in Syria, and it gets all the more interesting recently as well, because we have this Seymour Hersh article that came out that discusses the idea that certain elements in the American military have been undermining the Obama administration and behind the scenes working with Putin in Russia and Assad in Syria. And he's taking a lot of heat for it because it sounds like a fairly bizarre story on the surface. But I would say it's just bizarre enough that it could possibly be true. And we certainly know that the shadow government has a life of its own, and the elements in the intelligence and military community have a life of their own. And certainly this could be a possibility. Something like that could go a long way in explaining why things are so on the surface so convoluted in Syria and the U.S. policy there. So now we have somewhat like 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 countries all involved in Syria. And we still find ourselves in the same place, although the presence of Russia has been really something to watch. Obviously, they are very serious about defeating ISIS in Syria, and they are very serious about fighting Al-Qaeda in Syria, and the United States has been kind of dilly-dallying. And proof of that is the fact that how come the only offer that we have now from the Obama administration and the U.S. military is more of the same, only more of it. in this constant talk of stepping up the attacks, I would assume that if they were serious about taking on ISIS in Iraq and Syria, they would have stepped it up a long time ago, and the Russians have proved what stepping up looks like. So the fact that their solution to this problem is to abandon all the previous programs and then just step up the action against these jihadi elements in Iraq and Syria seems a little preposterous. So as usual, um, even though it looks like total chaos over there, there are a lot of people that are getting exactly what they want, and agendas are being achieved in this Syrian clusterfuck. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.